Your brain has already started changing how it handles money, and it did not tell you. There is a threshold in the savings journey where the brain stops classifying its owner as someone who protects money and begins classifying them as someone who deploys it. The person is not consulted. The shift is not announced. One day, the individual is a saver. The next day, the same individual is processing every financial decision through a completely different filter. For most middle-class households, that threshold falls at approximately $25,000. Not because the number itself is significant, because at that amount, the brain has accumulated enough evidence to reclassify the person who produced it. And the person it reclassifies them as thinks about every dollar differently than the person they used to be. What that reclassification changes, and why the brain hides it from you, is what the research documents. Below $25,000, the brain operates in what behavioral researchers describe as conservation mode. Every financial decision passes through a single filter. How do I protect this? The savings account is treated as a defensive position. Spending is evaluated as a threat. Investment is evaluated as risk. The dominant financial emotion is vigilance. The brain scans every transaction for potential loss. This is not a character trait, it is an operating mode. The brain adopted it when reserves were low, and it maintained it as reserves grew. It is the saver identity. And for the first phase of the savings journey, it is functional. It produces the discipline needed to accumulate the first 5,000, the first 10, the first 15. The conservation mode is what built the balance. But at approximately $25,000, the brain encounters a problem. The conservation mode that built the balance is now preventing the balance from growing further. Protecting money and growing money require opposite cognitive approaches. Protection requires avoiding risk. Growth requires deploying into risk. The saver identity cannot do both. It was designed for one function: defense. And it is still running defense when the situation has shifted to one that requires offense. The research on identity-based behavioral change documents what happens next. The brain begins reclassifying the person, not through a conscious decision, through accumulated evidence. $25,000 of sustained financial discipline is enough data for the brain to conclude that this person is no longer someone who is trying to survive. This person is someone who builds. And builders do not protect. Builders deploy. The shift manifests in observable behavioral changes before the person has language for what is happening. The first change is in the questions the person asks. Below the threshold, the dominant question was, how much could I lose? Above the threshold, the question becomes, how much am I failing to gain by doing nothing? The same brain that once feared losing $500 now fears the cost of leaving $500 uninvested. The loss aversion system has not disappeared. It has been redirected. It now calculates the loss of inaction rather than the loss of action. The second change is in vocabulary. The person begins using words they did not previously use in financial contexts. Position, allocation, deploy, return, exposure. These words did not arrive through education. They arrived because the brain's new operating identity requires a new vocabulary to execute its new function. A saver does not need the word deploy. An investor cannot function without it. The vocabulary change is not a cause of the shift. It is evidence that the shift already happened. Describing something physical the listener feels. The third change is the most disorienting. Risk begins to feel different in the body. Decisions that previously produced anxiety in the chest and tension in the jaw now produce a different sensation. Not comfort. Assessment. The body is no longer reacting to risk as a threat. It is processing risk as a variable. The stomach does not clench. The breathing does not shorten. The hands do not grip. The same financial scenario that would have produced a physical stress response 6 months ago now produces a cognitive calculation. Not because the person became braver, because the brain reclassified the person processing the scenario. For a middle-class household, the practical consequence of this research is significant. The person who reaches $25,000 is no longer operating with the same brain that started at zero. The filter has changed. The questions have changed. The vocabulary has changed. The physical response to risk has changed. The individual who sits in front of the laptop at $25,000 is a measurably different financial decision-maker than the individual who sat there at $5,000. The brain made that transition without permission and without announcement. Most people who have crossed this threshold do not know they crossed it. They notice that they think about money differently. They notice that conversations about investing no longer feel foreign. They notice that the word risk no longer triggers the same physical response. But they do not connect these changes to a specific mechanism. They assume they simply learned more or grew more confident over time. They did not learn more. They did not grow more confident. Their brain reclassified who they are. And the person it reclassified them as operates with a different filter on every dollar that passes through their hands. If you have been noticing that your relationship with money has been shifting in ways you cannot fully explain, this is the mechanism. Your brain crossed a threshold and changed your financial identity without telling you. The saver is still inside you, but the investor is now making the decisions. Subscribe for more breakdowns of the psychology behind your financial decisions.